Until late 1941, the British are fighting a war against the Germans at their doorstep. But a new offensive is about to take place at a more distant location in the British Empire. October 1941, Japan completes final preparations for war. A prime objective is Malaya because of its rich natural resources of rubber. But to take Malaya, Japan must also conquer Singapore, the most heavily armed fortress in the world. For more than 100 years, Great Britain has dominated Singapore. British military experts have long believed that any invasion of Singapore would come from the sea. The world's largest fixed long-range guns guard the south, east, and west approaches to the island from attack. Army Commander General Sir Arthur Percival anticipates enemy landings at beaches in Siam and northern Malaya, then a drive down the peninsula to Singapore. To prevent this, the English adopt a new defense plan called Matador, in which British troops would be moved across Siam to defend the beaches against a Japanese invasion force. The British troop movement would require 24 hours. Percival is told to prepare, but receives no orders to move. December 7th, 1941, 2 hours before the attack on Pearl Harbor, the war in the Pacific begins. Japanese troops under the leadership of General Yamashita are to land at the same beaches that Percival wanted to defend in Plan Matador. 3 of the toughest divisions in the Imperial Army make up the invasion force.
The 25th Army that invaded Singapore was one of the best trained forces that the Japanese Army had. Been trained in jungle warfare, they'd prepared for this, they'd even done something unusual.
Soldiers have landed. Rumors circulate, numbers in the hundreds of thousands. Making the situation worse, enemy planes not only surprise the British forces, but demoralize them as well, because there are no RAF fighters in the air. The British have less than 200 planes in Malaya, and most of them are obsolete. The few that get off the ground are no match for the highly maneuverable Zero fighters. Only 50 British planes survive the attack. Within 24 hours, the air over Malaya and Singapore is controlled by the Japanese. On December 10th, 97 Japanese planes attacked the only 2 large Navy ships in the Far East. Without RAF protection, the ships are caught in an unavoidable crossfire of torpedoes. The battleship Prince of Wales and the cruiser Repulse are sunk, taking 840 men with them, including Admiral Sir Tom Phillips, recently appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Navy in Singapore. The battle would affect the future strategy of war. For the first time in history, battleships underway at sea are sunk from the air. The Japanese have once again rewritten the rules of war at sea. The blow to British morale is tremendous. The one naval force which could have come to the rescue of the British is in ruins. The United States Pacific Fleet is still reeling from the 2-hour surprise attack at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, just 3 days earlier. With the Japanese making more aggressive moves in the Pacific, British reinforcements are increased in Singapore. Albert Adams is a private in the British infantry.
We was going to the Middle East, actually, and after Pearl Harbor, we diverted to India because we had to be rigged out again with tropical gear. We arrived in Singapore. It was a marvellous place. The climate and everything is perfect. I think that's why most of them survived, because of the climate, etc. Actually, I think a lot of it, the reason why we went was actually because most of the civilian population wouldn't leave because they thought it's impregnable. The island, they thought, no, I'd never surrender or anything like that, so they didn't travel.
The British soldiers are unconcerned about the Japanese making their way down Malaya. They consider themselves a better trained, better equipped army. With complete air superiority, Japanese ground forces now push down the Malay Peninsula by whatever means possible.
They didn't have a lot of gasoline-powered vehicles, so they had done a lot of intelligence work. And you could use bicycles, an unexpected weapon, move along, keep people moving. Malaya had relatively few cities. The area where they actually landed were just small port towns. It's not like the Philippines, where you've got a Manila where potentially you could have had a big urban battle. There was, relatively speaking, little resistance because the British kept pulling back. And of course, that was all the advantage of the Japanese.
Ironically, the British have engineered the road so well, the Japanese advance with extra speed. Demolition tactics failed to stop the infantry on bicycles. Special construction units rush in to repair bridges for the tanks and trucks to follow.
The Japanese have a saying, a sort of parable about themselves, particularly males. The symbol is the carp, and the carp swims upstream against all obstacles. If he hits an obstacle, he just keeps trying. I think there was a carp-like quality to the Japanese advance in Malaya. Meet an obstacle, fight it. If the British are blowing things up, bring in Korean laborers or whoever to reconstruct the roads at night and then move your troops along rapidly as you can. Just keep going. That was one of the things I think which surprised the British, the intensity and the determination with which the Japanese continued this advance.
The Japanese battle plan calls for victory in 100 days. But in less than 30 days, the Japanese pushed the British halfway down the coast of Malaya. By January 7th, the front lines are within 250 miles of Singapore.
The individual Japanese soldier certainly would have had a certain degree of apprehension about going up against the British, even though there's propaganda about how the colonialists are corrupt and weak. But then to see this thing succeed, to have it go as well as it did, as fast as it did, would have been amazing. There would have been a sense of elation as well as a sense, always remember, this is battle.
The speed of the Japanese advance catches the British completely off guard. English regiments are in disarray. Untrained in jungle warfare, they are ordered to delay the Japanese as long as possible. They must destroy anything that can be used by the enemy and then retreat. Since British military experts believe that tank fighting in thick jungle terrain would be useless, there is not a single Allied tank in all of Malaya. That leaves no logistical way to hold off a large invading tank force. The Japanese constantly outflank the British lines with their skilled jungle fighting. By the end of January 1942, all hope of holding the Malay Peninsula has evaporated. The British are ordered to withdraw to the stronghold of Singapore. On January 31st, the British troops complete their withdrawal into Singapore. Behind them, the causeway connecting the island to the mainland is blown up, hoping to prevent any Japanese invasion.
They would never take it. Well, it's obvious, wasn't it? All that naval guns they had situated on the coast. We saw about 3 Japanese planes while we were there. Dropped about 3 bombs, and that was it. And they didn't look like old training planes, you know, nothing special about them.
However, one of the mainstays of a defense, air power, is lacking in Singapore.
They had loads of planes sent in crates. They weren't even assembled. Spitfires and Hurricanes, but they weren't assembled at all.
British troops who have just arrived in Singapore are given orders to start digging defense positions. The fact that this is being done with the Japanese at their doorstep is a result of British overconfidence in their ability to hold Singapore. Singapore's defenses to the south are strong, but there's still a vulnerable opening in the north, which has never been closed. The giant guns cannot be used for protection. General Percival spreads his men along the beaches, hoping to prevent the Japanese from getting a foothold on the island. Only 2,500 men protect the narrowest point of the strait. Here, in small boats, 4,000 Japanese are getting ready to attack. February 8, 1942, Japanese General Yamashita decides to invade Singapore. With his supplies running out and his men outnumbered 3-1, his only hope is to force the British into a quick surrender.
Yamashita seized the heights in Johor, which is on the mainland of Malaysia, opposite the island of Singapore. They set fire to oil tanks on the naval base. They had the artillery advantage. They could create a lot of noise. They had command of the air. They were dropping bombs, and so the spirits of the Japanese troops must have been at this amazing, rapid advance on the city, terrifically high as they prepared for the climactic moment of seizing the city itself.
The Japanese send up an observation balloon to direct their artillery fire. The British have no planes to knock it down.
What Yamashita did that was surprising was to go around and have an amphibious force land on the
The Japanese drive a deep wedge into the British lines, forcing them to retreat. Soon, the entire city is within the range of the Japanese artillery. Within 5 days, the Japanese capture the reservoirs and cut off the city's water supply.
General Yamashita wanted to take the city of Singapore without a fight because he knew that his troops were inferior in number to the defenders. And so the first thing they did was have planes fly over that dropped literally boxes that contained appeals to surrender, basically saying there's no reason to have a battle in which we're going to kill a lot of civilians. You should give up to save the women and children that are in the city. If you don't, I will order an annihilation attack on the city of Singapore. 3 days later, a warning, you better come to meet me to talk about surrender terms, or else.
Churchill orders his generals to defend Singapore to the death. Surrender, he says, is out of the question.
We've never had enough time to be worried or anything like that. Most of the guys got there and there was, walls in the firing line, but it only lasted for a couple of days. I think it took about 5 days for a car to come from the top of Malaya to Singapore, and the Japs done it in 3. Front line, another wave came to the back of the troops, and actually they had no chance at all.
Finally, the British commanders agree that with the water supply nearly gone, short on food, gasoline, and their troops exhausted, counterattack is impossible.
Everything, all the service and everything was on the mainland. And that's one reason they were cut off for water and everything. The people were But when it stopped, well, actually it was glad it was over in one way, because it was over and done with.
It's got to be one of the most unusual encounters ever. It was held in a bank. In an old-fashioned bank, they had a cage like for the tellers to be in, when people had the money. They met inside this cage to talk and negotiate.
1942, Singapore falls to the Japanese.
It's 130,000 prisoners of war. A significant number of them were sent north as forced laborers to help build the railway from Thailand into Burma, the infamous bridge on the River Kwai. They linger in memory in Australia because of the belief there that the British High Command didn't do all that it could have done to keep them from becoming prisoners.
Well, I was a bit concerned what would happen, and everything for the future. Of course, your parents, too, that's what you think of it most. We just took it for granted as prisoners of war, and that was it. You can expect anything,
Instead of the traditional victory parade, Yamashita orders his men to pass through the city in silence, carrying boxes containing ashes of the dead.
I think the best way to sum up what the victory at Singapore meant to the Japanese people, army, everybody involved, is the name they gave the city. When they captured the city, they renamed it Shonan. Sho is the character, the first syllable for the first part of the emperor's formal name, Showa. It means enlightened. Nan is the word for south. So this was Japanese liberators coming to enlighten and free the city of Singapore from its British colonial oppressors. It means that the Japanese have a base of operations from which they can conduct all kinds of operations, intelligence operations, military operations, naval operations in Southeast Asia. It's a sense, again, of tremendous pride to have done this, a terrific boost to morale at home.
The campaign to take Malaya and Singapore will cost the Japanese over 3,500 dead and over 6,000 wounded. The 130,000 prisoners of war would be treated with appalling cruelty and inhumanity by their captors, a constant reminder of the fall of Singapore. The British have spent nearly 20 years building the fortress of Singapore. The Japanese are able to conquer it in 70 days. At this point, it looks like the Japanese are assured of victory in the war. But the British fighting spirit will be buoyed in the coming months by the rebuilt American Navy and a push to retake the Pacific. On December 7th, 1941, during a 2-hour sneak attack on the American Pacific Fleet anchored at Pearl Harbor, Japanese Navy pilots scored a near-complete victory. Almost 85% of the American fleet was either damaged or destroyed. It was one of the most devastating losses in the history of the United States Navy. Japanese airman Taisuke Maruyama was flying a torpedo bomber that day. Leon Cole was a turret gunner on the USS Oklahoma. This is where their paths would cross. On the battlefront. By June 1941, Japan has made aggressive military maneuvers into China and Southeast Asia. To be independent of Western domination, Japan needs access to the natural resources of these regions. But the United States objects to the invasions, and tensions build between the two countries. The Japanese realized that war with the United States could become inevitable. With American economic and military strength, such a confrontation would overwhelm Japan's armed forces unless Japan strikes first. September 1941, Japanese carrier pilots begin training for a very special mission. One of the pilots in training is Taisuke Maruyama.
I was a second-ranked pilot then. I was 19 years old. At that time, I was stationed at Kamoike base at Kagashima on Kyushu Island. The type of training I got was very basic, in a beginner's training plane. At Kamoike base in Kagashima, I did a lot of bombing training in a Type 97 bomber. Kagashima Bay has a structure that is very similar to Pearl Harbor. So I got a lot of training going from Kagashima Bay to Sakura Island, flying low and then attacking. We practiced 12 hours a day. The training was very difficult.
The long-term Japanese battle plan for domination of the East includes an invasion of Thailand, Burma, Malaya, the Philippines, Singapore, and the oil-rich Dutch East Indies. All that stands in the way is the American fleet at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. For over a year, the Japanese Navy plans the attack. Sensing hostilities with Japan, the U.S. Pacific Fleet is repositioned from its home base in San Diego to Hawaii. From May 1940, the fleet remains at Pearl Harbor as a bulwark against Japan. Aboard the battleship Oklahoma is Leon Kolb.
My home state was Oklahoma. I came from Oklahoma City. My first ship was the USS Texas, and I was aboard it 1 year until it was reassigned to go to the East Coast. And a friend of mine who I'd made buddies with at the training station, he says, I have a friend on the Oklahoma, and it's supposed to be a real good ship. It has bunks. We don't have to sleep in hammocks. And I said, let's go. That's a ship for me. I was rated a gunner's mate, second class petty officer, and I was stationed in the forward 14-inch gun turret. It had 3 guns in it, and they were called 14-inch because the diameter of the projectile was 14 inches in diameter. My job in the gun turret was in the gun room, seeing that the guns were cleaned and ready to fire. The first time I went out, it was a wonderful experience. We had about 3 days in port after our maneuvers. I took my trip around the island as the others did, and figured it was a beautiful paradise. But when we were permanently stationed there, it soon became tiresome. You've seen all the sights, and we all looked forward to when we'll come back to the United States.
In September 1941, Pearl Harbor had been the home port for the bulk of American sea power for almost a year and a half. To protect the fleet, the U.S. Army also maintains 2 ground divisions. There is a continuing buildup of military personnel and weapons into the base. The Air Corps, operating principally out of Hickam and Wheeler fields, moves planes in to strengthen Hawaii's defenses. The planes are only used for reconnaissance, since there's little fear of an air attack. After all, Japan is nearly 5,000 miles away. In readiness for war, the United States has a plan. But that plan is based on ship-to-ship battles that have been waged since World War I. There is no preparation for a sea battle fought by carriers and aircraft. In this respect, the Japanese have lulled American forces into a false sense of security.
From what I'd heard from men that came back from the Asiatic fleet, they called it, they started rotating them. And when I talked to them about the Japanese fleet, they said, the Japanese fleet's a bunch of junk. Give us a couple of days and we can finish them all.
"27 submarines are sent ahead. They have been assigned to observe and report back the location of American ships. During the attack, they are to enter Pearl Harbor and sink any ships attempting to escape. 5 of them are also fitted with tubes that carry miniature 2-man submarines, which have been specially designed for this mission. They will slip through the harbor's defense gates on suicidal torpedo missions. But the main striking power of the plan rests with the torpedo planes.
Aboard the Hiryu, we were told that we were now a task force, and our objective was Pearl Harbor. For the battle, I was placed into a reconnoitering party. I was a spotter on a Type 97 bomber.
On November 26th, the same day, Secretary of State Cordell Hull presents usual.
The regular routine at that time was the Pacific Fleet would be basically divided up into two task groups. And one task group would be out for approximately 2 weeks drilling, come back in for refueling, replenishing stores, so forth, while the other group went out.
On December 2nd, the Japanese Naval Armada receives a coded message from Admiral Yamamoto. It says, "Climb Mount Niyataka." This is the signal to proceed with the attack. The ships move to a condition of readiness. This is what all of the airmen have been waiting for. The Japanese are disciplined and dedicated to the attack. Now that the command has been given, the future of the Empire rests in the hands of these young flyers, most not even 20. By December 4th, the task force is 900 miles north of Midway. It heads to the launch point, which is a 2-hour flight from Oahu. The attack is finalized for sunrise on Sunday, December 7th. Meanwhile, advanced subs continue to patrol the waters off Hawaii.
Our last time out at sea in maneuvers, we took turns standing watches up on the anti-aircraft guns, which would also be used for submarine defense if they were needed. One of the other gun crews spotted periscope, and they reported it. And instead of saying load and ready to fire, we made full speed out of the area. The United States doesn't want to be accused of starting the war.
The strike force is under orders to sink on sight any American, British, or Dutch ship and aboard any neutrals to prevent radio transmission. If it's detected, all the surprise is lost. But heavy weather and a rarely used shipping lane have paid off. The fleet arrives undetected. Early in the morning of December 7th, the Japanese convoy reaches its launch point, 275 miles north of Pearl Harbor.
I said a prayer and hoped that my family would be proud of me this day. A special message came to us from Admiral Yamamoto. The rise or fall of our empire depends on the outcome of this battle. Each man will complete his duty until his flesh is crushed and his bones become powder. The message makes me feel very strong. I sat in my plane ready to go. I was happy and anxious to attack. I trained very hard for this moment. Everywhere, men were cheering us and waving their caps.
The first wave is off the deck before dawn. Pearl Harbor is now just 2 hours away. For the Japanese approaching Pearl Harbor, there is one note of disappointment.
We got a report that there are no enemy aircraft carriers at Pearl Harbor. If I cannot get the carrier, I intend to get the battleship. My torpedo will not be wasted. Our plan to attack has been reviewed many times. If we achieve surprise, the torpedo bombers will go in first.
Because it is Sunday, there are no American surveillance planes in the air, and the Japanese easily make their way to the island of Oahu. 7:55 a.m., December 7th, 1941. It's another relaxed, beautiful day in paradise. Nobody on the island of Oahu expects or is ready for what will follow. .58 a.m. The first messages are sent to the mainland that Pearl Harbor is under attack. Dive bombers swoop in to strafe and bomb the planes parked tightly together at Hickam and Wheeler Fields, at the Kaneohe Naval Base, and the Marines' Eva Field.
a couple of German pocket battleships firing in on us. I had to go outside and look for myself because I counted 5 and 6 more explosions, and I thought, what's hitting us? There's no portholes in there so you can look out and see what's going on, but you sense that the ship's going way out of balance. So as the ship was tilting more, I went out on deck to see the water coming up on a waterway. It still didn't occur to me that the ship would capsize. By that time, others should start going over the side, so I assumed they'd heard the word to abandon ship. And I was one of the first 2 or 3 to swim to an officer's boat. As it was, it left 429 to drown, and 32 were cut out the next 2 days, or they would have been drowned too, out of a crew of about 1,380.
Now come the high-level bombers. Anyone who can find a gun and ammunition fights back. A second wave of attack planes continues to strafe and bomb. An exultant Taisuke Maruyama flies back to the carrier Hiryu with little fuel, but a lot of enthusiasm.
The bomb my plane dropped hit the battleship Oklahoma. Since it was my first mission, I was happy that my bomb did hit the Oklahoma and we won the battle.
Not all Japanese airmen make it back to their carriers. For the first time since America entered World War II, U.S. Marines would face Japanese infantrymen on Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. In the jungles, 2 powerful armies would clash in a 6-month battle that would claim nearly 30,000 lives. In 1942, Jasper Hood was a private first class with the 1st Marine Division. This is where he would meet the enemy on the battlefront. For the 5 months following Pearl Harbor, the Japanese continue their conquest of the Pacific. Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands is the latest addition. Guadalcanal is only 2,500 square miles. Most of it is dense jungle. But Japanese control would threaten Australia. With an airbase, enemy planes would bomb and disrupt Allied shipping between the United States and Australia. In July of 1942, Americans learned that engineers of the Japanese Imperial Navy had begun construction of an airstrip at the southern tip of Guadalcanal. "2,000 miles away, U.S. Marines arrive in New Zealand. One of them is a private first class in the 1st Marine Division, direct from training at Paris Island, Jasper Hood.
We bundled up and went up to Norfolk, Virginia, and shipped out and went through the Panama Canal, landed in Wellington, New Zealand.
The New Zealanders are pleased to accommodate U.S. Marines because it deters any Japanese plans of invasion. Week, the training program is canceled. Concern about the Guadalcanal Air Base takes precedence. The 1st Marine Division is assigned to the Solomon Islands. They are to take Guadalcanal and Tulagi.
We knew we were headed for someplace, but didn't know where. That particular time, there wasn't any place else to go. You was heading them up, moving them out. That you was moving someplace you'd rather not be moving toward, I imagine.
During the 2-week sea voyage to the Solomons, the Marines cram in whatever training they can. It is only theoretical, and they will soon be thrust into combat. Until then, there's time for a little R&R.
Nobody wanted to be there. You can bitch and moan and gripe, and if you do that, then you get up and do your job. So when you complain all the time and you can't do anything about it, all that does is make you feel worse.
Friday, August 7th, 1942. Americans shell the island of Guadalcanal to pave the way for the landing. For the first time,
There were good skirmishes there.
the raiders are barraged by mortar and artillery, but are able to clear out caves of dug-in Japanese and secure the island.
I don't know the beliefs of the Japanese people, but they would not surrender. You had to kill them.
On the very first day ashore, Marines easily take control of the airstrip. They christen it Henderson Field, after a Marine pilot who was shot down at the Battle of Midway.
The Japanese were caught completely off guard by the U.S. Marine landing in Guadalcanal in August of 1942. Because of poor intelligence reports following the landing, the Japanese High Command believed it was simply a reconnaissance in force and that the Japanese could quickly and totally defeat them. Later on, as the Japanese finally grasped the magnitude of the Marine landing, they sent, obviously, more reinforcements, including the 35th Brigade, with Major General Kawaguchi.
The Japanese plan is to strike fast before the Marines can bring in. The night after the American invasion, Japanese warships sailed down a narrow channel between Guadalcanal and the neighboring Savo Island. This time, it's the Americans who are surprised.
The darn little supply. And I think we pretty much were on this slaughtering block. I don't really think too many people thought that we were going to be able to hold on.
American plane lands on Guadalcanal. A week later, more planes follow. The newly arrived American planes keep the Japanese from landing reinforcements during the daylight hours. But when night falls, Japanese cruisers and destroyers make regular nightly runs down the channel between Guadalcanal and Savo Island. It is during these attacks that reinforcements move onto Guadalcanal. 2 weeks after the American landing, the Japanese make their first move to retake Henderson Field.
It's favored hand-to-hand combat and close combat. These are conditions the jungle terrain favors very much.
The attack is suicidal. Outnumbered more than 4 to 1, nearly 1,000 Japanese are cut down on the banks of the Tenarue River.
In the tropics, it takes a mighty few hours till that body is bloated, and then the insects take over. And so you have to do something to try and prevent disease.
But the Japanese are already gathering their forces for yet another attack on Henderson Field. General Kawaguchi, commanding the Japanese brigade, is convinced he can take back Guadalcanal within 6 weeks.
Their great advantage, I think, at Guadalcanal was the fact that many of the Japanese troops there were combat veterans. They had combat experience in China and the Netherlands East Indies. Many of the Marines didn't. Their great advantage, I think, at Guadalcanal was the fact that they were tough, hardened combat veterans. There were many difficulties associated with jungle fighting. The most important was the way that the jungle just fragmented units. It was very difficult to bring an entire unit together to accomplish its mission because of the rugged terrain, thick jungle, swamps, rivers, whatever.
After 3 weeks on Tulagi, Marines are transported over to Guadalcanal. Now they're on the alert for snipers.
The Japanese were very good using snipers. See, those palm trees, they just skinny up those things and set up there in the branches, and they'd get 2 or 3 before you'd ever get 10. That's how well hidden they were. See? And anytime you were on a trail going someplace, you're apt to run into them.
Because there was great difficulty trying to get resupply transports to Guadalcanal, the Japanese found themselves short of everything.
Out there on Guadalcanal, instead of sending everything over to Europe, then that's when the tide really began to change.
Marine intelligence drastically underestimates the increased strength of Japanese forces on the island. As a result, 700 Marines would have to fight over 2,000 highly trained Japanese.
Set up and were able to withstand the charge, but it was one heck of a night.
Monday, the 14th, with the will to fight keeping them going, the Japanese launch a full-scale attack.
When they set out to fight you, they just charge right at you, and it just wasn't an attitude of a slaughterhouse. So they have a charge, and they see what's that. They go back, regroup, and they come at you again.
Despite the hardships, they continued to persevere. Certainly, they had very little choice. I mean, they were on an island. They had nowhere to retreat. So in one sense, they had to fight. But their officers and their NCOs were strict disciplinarians, and the Japanese troops had been indoctrinated with the notion that the highest duty that they had was to die for His Imperial Majesty, the Emperor. Surrender was simply out of the question. Aside from the stigma attached to surrender, it was a court-martial offense. So if you surrendered, in theory, you could be tried and executed.
You always worried, you just didn't think on it. You have to believe that you're going to be here tomorrow. That's not to see you're not scared. I think probably one of the worst times I had any place, all the 3 landings I made, was on Guadalcanal.
American defenses begin to crack. The Marines pull back to their final holding position, a ridge only 1,000 yards from Henderson Field. The Japanese cannot withstand such a barrage. The Battle of the Ridge is over. History will appropriately remember it as Bloody Ridge. In December 1942, the 1st Marine Division is relieved by the U.S. Army. For nearly 2,000 American fighting men, Guadalcanal is their first and last campaign.
I was lucky. I didn't get scratched, and that's just pure luck. The man upstairs was looking after me, and I realized that, know that. I don't have any bad dreams or don't wake up at night clawing my sheets or anything. I just came out of it in physical and mental shape.
Jasper Hood would continue to fight in the Pacific War.
Immediately after the defeat on Guadalcanal, I don't think the Japanese fully recognized its seriousness. But several months down the line, even the staff officers in Tokyo finally recognized what a terrible defeat this was.
The Solomon Islands would see battle for the year to come and many casualties. The Japanese would lose 23,000 men. On the battlefront, there is no life without death.
China fights on as Nippon continues its unending terror from the skies. Home and countryside are demolished as the once stoic Chinese rush madly to shelters, tasting again and again the bitter cup of Japan's unceasing offensive, which now threatens the peace of the entire Pacific. No privacy in war. Tobruk in northern Africa tenaciously withstands repeated Axis attack. This lone British garrison in Libya remains a prospective rallying point for new campaigns to regain lost terrain. Heroic Greece suffers the pangs of war as Nazi might pours down the Balkans. A stunned people sorrowfully stand by as the invader destroys their homeland. Supporting British Empire troops are forced to abandon a valiant defense effort. In nearby Iraq, great oil supplies are endangered when revolt threatens. Britain enters and quickly wins control, while defenders abandon the fight and guns to the victors. Syria, age-old path to Suez and to India, is forced to surrender to Australians and Free French as a further check to German ambitions to seize great stores of valued oil. A Vichy-mandated stronghold yields as its officers and men become prisoners of war. Memories of the glory that once was France stir the deepest emotions as soldiers return from prison camps. The once revered battle flags of Empire and Republic pass in grim review before a still proud people whose hearts bow in submission in this, their darkest hour. Hands of the innocent reach out in hungry appeal. Dimmed eyes of the faithful stare in awe. Famished children ration sustenance. This is France under the conqueror's heel. The most relentless sea hunt in all naval history. Britain's great battleship Hood has been sunk by the German raider Bismarck. Britain's guns bark revenge. The Bismarck is wounded, cornered, and doomed. The Bismarck, pride of the swastika fleet, dives to her watery end.